Just a few weeks ago now, I discussed the massive layoffs at Microsoft, which hit some of their gaming studios pretty hard. The hardest hits seemed to be ZeniMax Online Studios, which is well known for their award winning MMORPG, The Elder Scrolls Online. And now, at the time, we thought that the only cuts at ZeniMax were related to their new project, which was still in development at that time, codenamed Blackbird. Blackbird was cut completely, and the majority of staff working on that game were sent home. In fact, most were simply locked out of their Slack accounts and email with zero notice of what was going on. Matt Fire, the head of ZeniMax Online Studios, also left on the same day, perhaps hinting at worse things to come. And today, we have new reporting that the situation at ZeniMax Online Studios is indeed worse than we could have imagined. This new reporting comes from GameDeveloper.com, who has continued to seek out and interview former and current ZeniMax Online Studios employees in the aftermath of Project Blackbird's cancellation and the accompanying staff layoffs. In their article, which I'll link down below, they write that Microsoft's decision to force people out of the door hasn't just caused widespread upheaval and emotional distress, but as some employees tell us, will also hamper the productivity of those left behind. Current ZeniMax employee and union member Paige Branson described that day as one of the worst days at a job they've had in their entire life. She explained Microsoft failed to effectively clarify who would be impacted by the layoffs, and claimed those who were eventually laid off were absolutely crucial to the success of The Elder Scrolls Online and integral to the everyday function of the studio. She goes on to say it was sad seeing people so distraught and confused and not knowing if they would have a job by the end of the day, or even if the layoffs were done by the end of the day. Branson said the layoffs felt like a betrayal of trust of the highest magnitude and stated it feels as if the company is now talking to shareholders first and developers second. ZeniMax Media's senior QA tester, Autumn Mitchell, was also interviewed and explained that a huge disconnect exists between developers who work on games and Microsoft corporate executives. Some people were here for 15 years and cut out, making it so that people have to rush to say goodbye to their colleagues that they've been working on various projects that have been making that same corporation money for 15 years. Now, if you didn't know, it was confirmed last year at the GDC conference by Matt Fire that ESO is one of Bethesda's most profitable titles, literally a cash-making machine, having earned almost $2 billion at that point, and certainly more by now. We'll talk about this more later, but as we've seen from Microsoft, profitability is no guarantee of employment, unfortunately. So obviously there's no good way to handle massive layoffs, but the game developer article and interviews go on to discuss the practical implications of these cuts on the studio's only current game, The Elder Scrolls Online. If you've been playing ESO lately, I think the effect of Microsoft budget cuts is becoming more and more obvious. This year, for example, ESO completely restructured their release schedule of content, opting for a year-long content drip rather than a large chapter expansion in the summer, which is what they've typically done for the past 5 to 6 years. This change in the cadence of content has been spun up as a net positive for the game, but I can't help to see this shift in a brand new light now that the full force of Microsoft layoffs is really bearing down on ESO. The game developer article goes on, a lot of practical knowledge just disappeared overnight. Everyone left now has to pick up the pieces as best they can. The dwindling morale and general confusion of it all has extended into our general workflow. We used to have very reliable people working on things, and they're no longer there. They were integral. I feel like they were numbers on the sheet that got cut, but the real application of what they were doing was integral to making everything run correctly. In that same article, Mitchell claimed that ZeniMax has lost a third of the institutional knowledge that was keeping a lot of its projects running smoothly. Microsoft said the cuts were made in service of streamlining workflows and making studios more agile, but Mitchell suggests the reality will likely require remaining employees to grind themselves to the bone by taking on the work of multiple people. She stated that this carcass of workers that remains is somehow supposed to keep shipping award-winning games. I don't really know how that works. It looks like a lot of people moving between projects to fill in the position of someone who was laid off, and it probably took them a good 6 months to figure out how to do that role effectively. So this just confirms basically the worst case scenario for ZeniMax Online Studios has actually happened. Not only has their new unreleased project been completely cut and that team fired, but up to 1/3 of the staff supporting their only active game, The Elder Scrolls Online, was also let go, and the remaining developers now have to pick up those pieces. So if you thought 2025 was a light year in terms of content for ESO, then I can't imagine what 2026 is going to look like now that a bunch of their team is also gone and job duties have to be split up between remaining staff. Matt Fire's quote retirement, which happened the same day as these layoffs, is making a lot more sense now. He must have been completely gutted knowing that the studio he created back in 2006 and 2007 would never be the same. Leadership turnover at a time like this usually isn't a coincidence. It's typically a signal that major shifts are coming, shifts that might not benefit the long-term future of ESO or its players. Without his vision and experience, there's a pretty big risk that the game could start to drift, or even worse, start to shrink. It's really sad that we've seen this trend lately with Microsoft-owned studios especially, that even if your game is successful, it really means nothing in terms of job security. Just look at Tango Gameworks. They released Hi-Fi Rush to overwhelming praise, one of the most talked about surprise hits of the last couple of years. That game made a lot of money for Xbox. It was fun, it was creative, but none of that stopped Microsoft from shutting down the studio and laying off its developers anyway. At Microsoft, it seems that if you do poorly, you get cut, but if you do amazing, you get cut just as well. There's really no winning here for developers or even for players. As I said, the move away from chapter releases from the Elder Scrolls Online seems to be a bit darker than we previously thought as well. I mean, on paper, this was sold as a way to keep players engaged year-round and a way for developers to focus on just the best updates and release them when they were ready without having to crunch everything into one annual release. But clearly now, the reality is that with these new cost-cutting measures from Microsoft, it's more likely a reflection of the studio trying to do more with less resources. For years, chapters were the backbone of ESO's content cadence. Each summer was a huge deal. It gave players big, meaty updates, massive new zones to explore, new trial content for veteran players, fully voiced quest lines, rich lore, expansion, and new and exciting systems for players to engage with. The chapter model gave us Greymore, Somerset, Elsewhere, Necrom, High Isle, all of those DLCs packed with pretty substantial value, whether it was a new class, new systems, like scribing and antiquities or companions. We know, for example, that ESO's latest class, the Arcanist, which released in the Necrom DLC, that expansion took over 1 full year of development to bring that new class into the game. So what are the chances now that that same amount of work and detail can happen with a team of broken developers struggling to keep the game afloat? I do hope that the team can still continue the great work that they've done in the past, even with fewer developers on hand. But it does seem like smaller updates stretched across the calendar with no real payoff moment could be the norm going forward. I mean, it really isn't up to them anymore, sadly. It's not a creative decision. ESO just doesn't have the resources that it used to have a few years ago. One example, in fact, that just dawned on me recently was ESO's action-focused trailers, which the game has been famous for years. You know, like this one here for the High Isle chapter, which was really popular back in the day. These were all extremely well done, action-packed, definitely got a ton of views on YouTube. And like I said, those trailers have been done every single year since the beginning of the game. That is until this year, 2025, when we simply got a gameplay trailer instead. No CGI action trailer at all. Now, yeah, I know these trailers are probably outsourced to some visual studio who specialize in that sort of thing, but that just shows you the rampant cost-cutting of Microsoft at work here when they're not willing to shell out for a proper trailer for the game's new content, which has been done every year prior. They're literally looking at anything that can be cut, will be cut, and that's a big disappointment. I really enjoyed those trailers. But if ESO is going to survive these cuts, it may need to shift its strategy further into maintaining the game's current features. That means updating the base game as they've done this year, polishing existing features, quality of life patches, maybe a new dungeon or event here and there. But those earlier days of the new systems, game-changing features, and inventions, those might be on pause for a while. And that's why I'm concerned about 2026 for the Elder Scrolls Online. I mean, realistically, what kind of updates can they do now with their studio head gone, key staff members gone, and a shrinking budget? We might see another update like we got this year, but with even less meat to it. Now, I'm also personally expecting a bigger shift to ESO Plus based content, which is ESO's subscription based model. This year, for example, we saw ESO add new companions, not to the chapter content, but for ESO Plus members. I think we'll continue to see more of that and more benefits getting pushed to ESO Plus membership, as that's probably the most profitable part of ESO's business model right now. In fact, ESO Plus, along with probably housing, might be the only parts of ESO that kept it safe from Microsoft shutting down the game completely. Oh, and of course, the Crown Store and Crown Crates. And I really hate saying that. I want to be optimistic here. I've been playing ESO since the beginning, and I've covered this game for many years on YouTube. What happened to this development studio just wasn't right, and that's the main thing I want to highlight in this video. Say what you want about the game of The Elder Scrolls Online, but these are real people with real families at the end of the day. They made ESO into one of the most successful and profitable online games in the world, and they were even working on a second new game using those same strategies and what they had learned from the first. They were literally at the top of the industry, and their owner, Microsoft, could not care less. At the end of the day, this affects everybody. The developers, of course, who need to find new jobs and maybe new places to live, but it also affects the players. When you look at the facts, studio-wide layoffs, the loss of leadership, shift in content strategy, it's hard to ignore the writing on the wall here. It doesn't mean ESO is dead necessarily, but it does mean we need to temper our expectations going forward. The game might not grow the way that it once did. It might become more about preservation than evolution. And for longtime fans, that's going to be a tough pill to swallow. But as always, let me know what you think in the comments. Are we witnessing the end of ESO's best era? Or do you still have some hope for what's ahead? Let me know what you think, and thanks for watching.